So let's play. Amen. So, after establishing that our mindset needs to change on how we perceive the way back for the Sunday law, bearing in mind you can approach this issue in different perspectives. We first made a shift from the event itself. It's not Sunday Sabbath, it's another thing. It's not Protestantism that is our problem, but it's just a portion of the problem. I hope you can see those developments. Now we are realizing it's not even an issue to do with a decree. Not that there are no decrees. I hope that is clear. But the event that we will say this is what marks this event is what we are trying to see. It might not necessarily be a decree. And just look at Elder Terry's. Just look at another teacher who is able to deal with the same concept, the Sunday law, and see how we compare the notes of Curtis and what Elder Terry presents. So remember, Curtis had a chance to present to us here as not just BOM, but as East Africa. I hope people join and remember. And I've repeatedly said, not to everyone, but I think a few of us can say, there is some glow when something glows. Then the aspect of shining or becoming more clearer when you compare and connect Curtis' presentation with Elder Terry's presentation. They seem in most aspects to complement one another. I know Curtis began differently, but at the conclusion, you would compare a lot of concepts and you would see they are all addressing the same issues and they are complementing one another in a way. So if you remember, when Curtis first presented for us, the first study Curtis was able to demonstrate was the use of prophetic time spans. If you remember. So before we even go to what Curtis presented, we need to understand how prophetic time spans work. Because who was the first person to use prophetic time spans? Let me see. Okay, in this movement. You have an idea? Elder Jeff, where? So how did the Jeff use a prophetic time span to predict a Sunday law? Yes? Anyone else? Who is saying that? Just came and news. But where? Which study? Yes. Uh-huh. What Jeff did, he coined this term. Someone loved this term very much. You know who? Yes? Who? Yes? Polycarp. Polycarp. He loved the wonderful number, Palmon. When someone just mentions Palmon, the one who comes into my mind is Polycarp. Actually, they have a movement, they call it Palmonite ministry. Anyway, Elder Jeff was able to understand how the Bible behaves, not just the Bible. This is one of the rules given by William Miller. William Miller says, all scripture is what? Everything is important. And one of the reference verses William Miller gives in the rules, for those who remember the rules, I don't know whether you study them nowadays, it's a quote from the book of Matthew, where Christ says, I did not come to destroy the law of Moses. What did I come to do? And then Christ says, not even a what? So if there are numbers in the Bible, they're not important. They are. And that's what Miller understands. Miller deals with numbers. The Millerite history is like the template that gives us everything we have. The Millerite movement was based on what? Prophetic time spans. 2300 days from this, we mark 457 to 1844. Daniel 12:10 onwards. The number 1335. The number 12 of 90. It was a familiar concept when you look at the Millerite history. And Elder Jeff would say he would not draw lines, but I know in a way he would say even Elder Jeff dealt with it. She would speak of number 7 as, you know, Elder Jeff spoke like, I don't know how to describe it. He was not used to too much writing. He would give sermons, right? And also when you look at the Habakkuk tables, he would just speak more information from speaking, and like someone like me who writes more than I speak. So you would find he would in a way give concepts of that year's its restoration. The Bible was transformed for how long? How many years? All that, those concepts. But the clinical work that we see in our movement is 2012 to 2014, this dispensation here. Because this is when we are going to realize you can use prophetic numbers to make predictions. So, and the numbers that were prominently used is the number 126, is the number 151. What we need to understand is that we don't just take numbers and just make projections. There is a principle behind the prophetic time spans, and it is the principle of end from what? From the beginning. So you can go to a date, 1888, this is the beginning, and you can say, using the prophetic time spans, this is the beginning, this is the end. And what you're going to show is that there are properties here which you need to see repeat here. But you need to be careful. Isaiah 46:10. That's when you get the concept of end from the beginning. Isaiah 46:10 is the one that gives us the aspect of progression. And it also gives us the aspect of repeat and enlarge. You need to understand that the end is equals to the beginning, but the end is not the beginning. And one study that demonstrates this is this study here. You need to know what you mean when you say the end is the beginning, because properties in the beginning are properties in the end. So this is Moses. This is who? According to Paminda. Isaiah 46. This is Moses. Who is this? Who is this? Yes? You don't need to go there. Let me read for you, and then you tell me. I'm going to begin from verse 8 to give you the context. Remember this. So show yourselves men, bring it again to mind, you all ye transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none like else, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. So God is telling them, you need to remember what? Because when you remember the former things, you'll have a discovery. There is none like me. I am God, and there is none like me. How? I declare the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, how do I declare the end? From the beginning. Ancient things, the beginning, the future, things not yet done. And he gives an example of how God is peculiar and no one like God. I have a counsel that shall stand, and I'm going to do my pleasure. What is God's pleasure? It's what is in verse 11. There is a ravenous bird from the east, who is the man that executes God's counsel, who is the man that comes from a far country. So I'm not going to do that, but you know the bird, who is the man coming from the east, which is the far country, executing the counsel. That language is the what? Is the end. Are we together? So if that language is the end, you need to see a bird who is the man from the far country executing God's counsel. And if the end is the beginning, maybe I'll demonstrate that. So this is the beginning, and this is the end. In the end, God says there is a bird. The bird is from the east, who is a man from the far country. What is going to do? Some execution. 3 points. What do you need to see at the beginning? The end is the beginning. You need to see a bird who, from the east, who is a man from the far country, who is going to do some execution. So in this aspect up to that point, the end is the beginning. The principles are the same. By the way, not everything is the same. Some information here might be more than here. And the nature of how that looks like is where we say the end is not the beginning. Because who is this bird? This is Moses. Where's the far country? He's doing some execution. What is the execution? Moses has to deal with who? With Egypt. Now come to the end. Who is the end? God is telling them, you need to know where the prophet stands. This is Isaiah. Where is Isaiah standing? He writes information that is going to fulfill 200 years to come. If you look at the chronology of the kings, where Isaiah stands in history, we do not have even the history of the last 7 kings. There are more kings before you go to Manasseh. So he is predicting events in the future. But his wordings, where he stands in prophecy, he's speaking about what? Deliverance. Are we together? He's speaking of the events that will transpire under the deliverance of God's people. So you need to see the context of Isaiah 46 from verse 1. There are 2 gods, Bel and Nebo. What are they doing? They are going down. These are the Babylonian gods going down. So it's the fall of Babylon. And God is bringing who? Cyrus. So, coming from where? The east. Midian is east of Egypt. Persia is east of Babylon. How did Moses deliver them? Using a rod. How did Cyrus deliver them? Using an army. That's what I'm saying. The dynamics of how this fulfills is different. So you need to understand when we say the end is the beginning. Properties here and properties here are not 100% literal the way they fulfill here. So if you mark a Sunday law here and you want to see a Sunday law here, if this was Sunday Sabbath, you can't expect to see what? Sunday Sabbath. That's the mistake we did. So people have been waiting Sunday Sabbath. In 2014, it fulfills no Sunday Sabbath. You end up saying, that's a false prophet. We didn't see an event because we don't know how rules work. I was not teaching that. I wanted to demonstrate that when you come to the issue of prophetic time spans, you need to understand they use the same order. I hope that is clear. So, who was the first person? I have given the first example where we have this. It is done. It's not so familiar to us until This one. This is Elder Paminda. This is Elder Tess. This is where we are going to see the miracles of this principle. Because where we are in history, we are here. And Elder Tess is going to demonstrate why this is a waymark and why this also is a waymark. And she's going to use the prophetic time spans by even going backwards and telling us why also this one was a waymark. So she will do things like this. 2014. And what you're going to be seeing is prophetic numbers showing the concept of end from the beginning. Different dates, different events, all showing that 2014 is an important event. It's an important year, and we need to ask ourselves what it was. And based on other studies, you can tell why 2014 is a waymark. The same was done for 2019. Why 2019 was significant. Events were done showing the events here, they fulfill here. All events on one waymark. It must be important. The same was done for 2021. So this is the first time we interact better with prophetic time spans. And the concept is end from the beginning. And for those who remember the studies, it was so glorious to see that indeed God explains the end from the what? There were events here that were made, and the events were seen to be fulfilled here. This was not so interesting compared to this. When people realized that we had made predictions to take place in 2019, and when exactly the year came, you could look backwards and say what? The predictions were fulfilled. I think Elder Tabo in the school in Uganda had a study connecting predictions with fulfillments. I think it's in the binding of web YouTube account. You can go and watch some of the events that Elder Tess had predicted here were seen to have fulfilled here. One of them is the impeachment. Another one is, let me not just go there, but there are those events. So this becomes interesting. So when Curtis comes, what is the issue? We want now to know, after 2021, what is the next waymark? So what do? It's 2024. We did it for 21, we did it for 19, we did it for 14. You do the same for 2024. Is 2024 a significant year? So the first study Curtis does for us is to go to the prophetic time spans. The same model Elder Tess was able to establish these waymarks. It's the same thing we need to do. This has to cement our mindset to understand that stop looking for a Sunday law in the future, 2025. Look at 2024. There is a lot of evidence from the external events, and now we need a prophetic model to second that argument, to justify that argument that 2024 is a very significant year in our history. So as we jumble from one person's study, whether it's July or what, someone else is telling us, first focus also on the year. It's 2024. And the prophetic time spans that were done for us, I think even other ministries have had a chance to listen. You need to see it's the same concept. There are events here which we can outline, which project 2024 as a significant waymark in our history. So, what are some of the numbers? What are some of the numbers that we are going to see? So, the first number Curtis deals with is the number 220. Then you'll have the number 180. Then you'll have the number 151. Then you'll have the number 110. Then we'll have the number 63. Then we'll have the number 15 and the number 10. So the 10 that I had here, you can remember it. So this takes us to the year 1804. This one is 1844. This one is 1873. This one is 1914. Oh, and there was the number 5. What am I doing? Like that. So it's 1873, 1914, and then we have 1961, 209, 2014, 2019. So those were the numbers that were used to demonstrate how events would be seen in the year 2024. So when you look at the first event, this is 1804. This marked a dictator. This one marked the issue of judgment. This one marked election. This one marked persecution of minorities. This is World War I, the Jewish. This one marks I've mixed up events. Let me not just pin them to, let me just put them here. Dictator. The next one was judgment. The next one was election. Persecution. So this tries to demonstrate to us that the year itself is a significant year. So we have a prophetic model that shows that. You can go to the Eurasian group, which also tells you the same. The external prophets are also agreeing that it's a significant year, number one. So we need to understand what is its significance. And the most popular one is what? It deals with what? It's I think close to 83, 84 countries in the world had elections. So the first aspect again brought to us is what? By the Eurasian group. Election. Internally, what is the issue being agitated again? Election. External and internal begin to agree. So that's the first thing we have. So you can go back to the study and look all the concepts that were done. I'm not planning to do that, but I want to demonstrate something using that. So, and what you're going to see when you use this concept of end from the beginning, take an example, 1914. And you're taking 1914 using the number 110 to take us to 2024. So 1914, you're going to realize it's in the midst of World War One. We know we're in the history of World War Three. And what you're going to see is that in this history of World War One, the events that transpire here are the events we need to see here. So it was so easier when you first go to this history, when Elder Tess would take an example in the history of World War II, he will take Adolf Hitler. And we want to demonstrate that Adolf Hitler is equivalent to who? Donald Trump. And reasons would be given why they are the same. A good example, so this is World War II. I'm just giving you an example. And you'd show the Holocaust is the same as what Donald Trump is doing with the migrants. In his first term, Steve Miller had a plan. They created concentration camps. They have reviewed them again, actually. One is called Alcatraz, a figurative term to show one of the prominent prisons that existed in American history where you could not escape. And how Trump dealt with minority groups is the same way Hitler did. This character is a dictator. So this character is a dictator. And you know when I mean a dictator, you have to silence the media. He has to silence the media. He has to purge out elements of opposition. He purges out elements of opposition. So you can have characters that show why this character is this character. Are we together? And so one of the concepts that Curtis will be able to deal with is to go back to this history and demonstrate how Hitler again, his history parallels that of Donald Trump. And he's going to parallel how Hitler rose to power with how Donald Trump rose to power. Are we together? So the way Hitler, dictator, rose to power in this history is the same way Trump will rise to power. And that's why where we get to the history of Adolf Hitler. And we are going to see, if I may draw a line here, that when Hitler was trying to rise to power, his first attempt was an attempt to take power through a what? Through a coup. And this attempt is going to fail. Because of that, he is going to be convicted, found guilty. But as he is being convicted, he's meaning sympathy from the people. He finds sympathy because they think he's a patriot. He's fighting for the glory of the Germans. One problem with Hitler is because in World War One, after the end of the war, the Versailles Treaty, this to him is a humiliation to the German nation. So his war here, trying to take over power, it's because he wants to uplift the glory of the nation. And as he is being convicted, because of his beliefs and ideologies, he wins sympathy to the Germans and the parties. And that's why by 1933, he is going to be elected as the Chancellor of the nation through the Nazi Party. And this is 1933, if I'm not wrong. When he is elected, legally elected, he tries it through a coup. He gets elected the right way, and he now rises to power. And he implements, when he comes to power, the first thing he implements is the Enabling Act. These are the ability to pass laws without the House. he becomes a dictator. So this is Hitler's history, and you can use it to teach about Donald Trump, where you would go to 2021, it's Donald Trump. There is the January 6th insurrection. He tries to win power the illegal way. He fails. What you see is a conviction. There is an investigation done. He's found to be the mastermind of the insurrection. But as the conviction is ongoing, there is even more cases that are unleashed. What does Trump win amongst the Americans? Sympathy. Regardless of the cases of felonies, regardless of the insurrection, he's winning sympathy. And so, 1933 is the same as July 18, 2024, where he's elected to be the flag bearer. This is the Nazi party. He's elected to be the presidential candidate under the Republican Party. And you can see him progressively take power. So what you see is a comparison between this history and this history. And the main focus is on the Nazi party being compared with what? The Republican Party. And they all seem to be the gatekeepers. So there is a book, if people would be interested, I'll forward it. It's one of the interesting books about, actually, Curtis proposed people to read it. It is How Democracies Fall. And the book tries to insinuate, if you want to see how a democracy falls, it's when those who are the gatekeepers, the ones who should make sure we don't go the other side, let go. So the Nazi party, being it a conservative party, its work was to conserve. The Republican Party, its work is to conserve, but it lets loose. And once they let loose, that's how democracy falls. So July 18, by the Republican Party handing over the seat, power, and the authority to Donald Trump, whatever happens next, this was the earnest of what we would see. So by looking at the history of Hitler, he's able to demonstrate that this is significant. A second testimony to this concept is by going to Daniel 11 from verse 5 to 16 and being able to demonstrate verse 5. This is verse 16. This is verse 13 to 15. This is verse 11 to 12. This is verse 10. This is verse 7 to 9, I think, or 8. I'm not so sure of the verses, but the remarks are the same. This is 1798. This is 1777. This is 1989. This is 2019. This is 2021. This is the Sunday law. This is the Battle of Raphia. This is the Battle of Paniam. This is where we get the concept Raphia and Paniam. And when you come to the Weimar Sunday law, verse 16, it is the king of the north entering the glorious land. This is Pompey conquering the glorious land. And when the glorious land is being conquered, there is a civil war. This is Aristobulus and Heraclius, the two sons of a high priest who dies, and all of them want to take the throne. When I go to this study, I always remember of Robert. Study he did in 2018 camp meeting in Kisii. This civil war, because of the internal affairs, they become vulnerable to Pompey and he conquers them. This is the way mark which we mark as the Sunday law. So when you go to this history, you're going to realize as the king of the north is dealing with the civil war, there is also a conflict between Pompey and who? And Caesar. When Pompey was in power, the three arms of the government were intact. They co-ruled the consul, the senate, and the seat of the empire. But when Caesar takes power, the Roman Republic is over. So it is interesting to go and dig deeper about this history here. But comparing about this conflict, so what we are going to see is that they are contending for a seat. And this seat they are contending for is the seat today we would call the papal seat. But by then, because it's pagan Rome, it's called Pontifex Maximus. It's one of the most powerful seats in the Roman history by then. Today it's the papal seat. By then it is not called the papal seat. So in this conflict, Caesar is in contention with the Senate, who are being backed by Pompey. There is one called Quintus Lutatius Catullus. There is another one called Publius Sabilus Saccharis, something like that. And when you look at these two characters, they are the most prominent conservatives. They have the most prominent conservative party here. And they are optimates. They are the most favored powers of the Senate. And they all want this power. They are being supported by Pompey to take over. But we are going to see that Caesar is going to win this seat. That's what makes him a dictator. So you need to ask yourself how he wins it. Who lets loose? And it speaks again about this conservative power who are the gatekeepers, allowing a populist, a dictator, to take power. The same story is connected again to this. So Curtis comes up with the same two concepts to show why we need to focus on the party and the role the Republican Party should have played to avoid what we saw in July 18. So by them saying Hosanna to Trump, it was significant. And the big problem we always have, it's because it's not a new thing. And you can take it back to 2019. We always have the mentality to look for magnificent event. You go to October 22nd. What was magnificent with October? It was just a normal day, but a very important waymark for Adventism. 2019, November 9, it was just a normal day. Before the day, most of us expected to have seen something. I believe hata mwenye anunuangi data hiyo siku, it was fully loaded. Yeah? Event after event, you are just trying to see what is the mind-blowing event that will mark this. Yet it was just a house event, which inspiration marks as a turning point in history. Maybe for July, it was significant, it was mind-blowing because people would see something they have never seen. No one expected to see it in America. It's a common concept in African countries. Denial of elections and protests and all that. But we need to change our mindset on how we see waymarks and how inspiration marks them as significant. Because when you look at these concepts and the ones we looked at in the morning, they all try to cement it's 2024, and this one trying to cement it's the Republican Party. And the other two concepts I did in the morning, it's showing July 18 and actually dealing again with the Republican Party. How many minutes? Yes? 94. Good. Maybe you can take a peek. I want to have I think Joy has shared in the group, so you retrieve it there. Sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm trying to rush with time because I'm behind time. I have a lot of things. So I also want us to look at another concept. Separating layers. So, and this concept comes after what we experienced in 2019. So, Elder Tess had marked November 9 as the way marked 2019. But there was a problem with us. You know, the package of the midnight crime message, all that information. And everyone thought all that information, whatever prediction was made in 2019, where should it be fulfilled? When? November 9. Now, what happens? Elder says you will all get it wrong because you don't know how to separate what? Layers. So if I draw a line here and I mark 1989, 2001, 2014, 2019, 2021. Let me use this as an example. We need to understand on this line, we mark events. And what we do, we mark events by threading out a story. So we need to thread a story. So, and as we speak of threading a story, we need to understand that you can't just take stories and thread them. This put us into problems because this waymark was formerly understood only as 9/11. It is because of this, it was seen that you cannot just say this is the waymark 9/11, but actually you need to mark the what? The year. Because all the events you mark on this waymark did not take place in the waymark 9/11. They took place within the year 2001. So we had marked the war between the king of the north and the king of the south. We had marked stories about Islam. We had marked studies about revolutions. We had marked studies about church and state. And the problem is, if you thought all these would take place on November 9, you couldn't see anything. So what was done is, when you come to this waymark, you need to separate layers. So if you're dealing with the king of the north, that's a different story. Thread that story. If you're dealing with Islam, that's a different story. Thread it independently. If you're dealing with this, the same. With this, the same. So if you deal with the king of the north and the king of the south, you can't mark 9/11 because there is no event that took place on 9/11, 2001, dealing with this subject. The event that took place here is the event of 11/9, when America first invaded the Afghan government as a response to 9/11. So you cannot mix up events. If it's church and state, please thread your story and don't factor in king of the north, king of the south, because these are different story. So you cannot now bring Russia and America and you're dealing with the politics in America. You are mixing things up. You're prone to making mistakes. Separate these layers. That's the first thing. So when you're dealing with the waymark of the Sunday law and you're dealing with Daniel 11:41, the king of the north shall conquer the what? What do you need to do? What do you need to do? Separate layers. You cannot factor in subjects that are not dealing with this event. the event itself, you can align all these, but you cannot say that this event, as an example, is dealing with what is happening inside the movement. As an example, this is an external event, and you need to focus on America and how the glorious land America is conquered. Are we together? So that's one of the concepts we need to factor in when we are dealing with this subject. A problem that you could see all along on all those who are trying to understand how this looks like. We need to factor in the concept of separating layers. Eh. Eh. Also, this story of dreading a story, another concept, it's a cousin of this. Because when you come to threading of a story, this one, you need to understand that you can thread a story, one, on a reform line. This is a threading of a story. Number two, you can thread a story on a dispensation. So you can take, and as an example, this dispensation, 2014 to 2019, and thread a story here. You'd call it book ending, if it makes sense by saying that. Elder Tess demonstrate how the King of the North and the King of the South war looks like in 2019. Where does the story begin? She does the studies here in Kenya, 2019, around December. She bookends the story from 14 to 19. And for you to see how Syria falls into the hands of Russia, you need to begin where the war began. For you to see how Venezuela falls into the hands of Russia, you need to see where the war began. You can thread a story within a dispensation. Number two, you can also thread a story within a wema. A good example is you come to this WEMAC 1989 and you'd see it's September, is it September 11, 1989, and November 9, 1989. So this is a singular event, but he's threading a story within. What happens on September? This is the first breach on the wall. This is the total collapse of the wall. So you need to see the first to the end. You're threading a story within a wema. You can do the same, 9/11, 11/9. So this is another concept we need to see, that you can thread a wema, a story within a wema. You can see how things transpire before you come to the end. So again, when we are dealing with this wema, you need to understand and factor in this, because someone wants to say it's July, that is the beginning. Are we together? And maybe the event or the end is December 19. So this is the beginning of an election process. This is the end. This begins by the nomination of Trump. This ends by the total takeover of the election by Trump through the Electoral College. So you wonder, how are you marking this? It's because we need to be familiar with such concepts for us to understand how this map looks like. Another concept that I want us to look at, it's the repeating patterns. And we need to understand how the repeating patterns work. So again, a concept brought into the Midnight Prime message. So when you look at the reform line of the Millerites, this is 1798. This is, let me mark April 19. And then I'm going to mark July 21st, 1844, October 22nd, 1844, and 1850. So when you look at this history, the first dispensation, the history of the plowing, and this is the history of the latter rain. This is the history of the early rain. This is the history of the harvest. Here, there are two minor waymarks. This one, Ellen White puts clear that in 1798, there is an arrival of a message. It actually takes around 20 years before a recipient of the message is found. 1816, Miller begins to study. 16 minus 98, you get around 20 years. And Miller begins to increase in knowledge because Daniel in 12:4 says, the book shall be unsealed. The level of the message is caused by the unsealing of a message, unsealing of a book, and by running to and fro, people increase in knowledge. After Miller understands the message, there is a burden shared to the people. And then you come to the formalization of the message. This is 1833. You can trade the waymark from 1831 when Miller first has a public teaching, and 1833 when Miller receives the credentials to teach. And when the message is given to the people, the message begins the work of convicting them, bring them to attention of the issue at hand. And we would say that this is when people begin to be tested. You cannot test the people before you give them the message. And by April, people had to choose to either shut their doors to the message and experience a fall or accept the message. Looking at the history of the plowing, you can compare to the history of the latter rain, because this is Samuel's Snow, the history of the second angel. It's Samuel's Snow giving the message at Boston Tabernacles. The midnight cry message was first given here. People still follow the cult of personality of William Miller. People are not paying attention to Snow. At Concord, on August the 1st, same year 1844, Snow repeats the message. Still few audience are listening to him. Until we come to August, from the 12th to the 15th, when the message is given at Exeter Camp meeting. And what you see is the aspect of a message swelling into a loud cry. Many voices join, as Bates put it. Even the train he travels with back home, everyone is sounding the alarm. Behold, the bridegroom coming. So what you do, you can use typology, and you can cut that history and overlay it here. And what you find, the arrival of a message can also be called Boston. The Concord is the increase of knowledge. Exeter is this formalization. And this waymark, October 22nd, which was the shut door, becomes this shut door. So this is how we realize when you use typology, characteristics on one dispensation can be seen as the characteristics on another dispensation. You can even go to the last dispensation and see characteristics and overlay them here. So the repeating pattern is the realization that every dispensation behaves the same way. So there is an arrival of a message, increase of the knowledge, formalization, test. And with that in mind, what we need to understand is that when you come to this line, 2001 is where I'm going to begin my line, and I'm going to put this as the Sunday law and as the close of probation. If I use the repeating pattern, you're going to realize this is the arrival of a message. We would also call it what? Boston. This is the increase of knowledge. We also call it Concord. This is the formalization. We also call it exeter. And this is the shutdown or the end of the test. And the same concept can be seen here as it is the end of that. This remark is also an arrival of a message, which is Boston. This remark is the increase of knowledge, which is Concord. This remark is formalization, which is Exeter, which leads us again to a test. This is where the test comes to an end. That's how repeating patterns work. Now the question is, what is the message that tests us here? And what is the message that tests us here? That's another characteristic we need to factor in. And the reason why it's important, it's because when you factor in that, then you're going to realize why the narrative here has changed. Because the message here is not so much about gender equality, right? What is it dealing with? Right from the Sunday law teachers, what are they dealing with? Politics. And people are trying to ask themselves, how is looking at Donald Trump and his tariff on trade wars connected to equality? If you understand how the repeating patterns work, you begin to solve such dilemmas. Are we together? I hope my time is not up. Good. Yeah, because how? Because if I don't finish here, it's until next year. So, when you look at the trading of a story, and you look at what I did in the morning class, 2014, 2019, 2021, 2024, I'm trading a story. And what is my theme? What is my story about? The Republican Party. So when I factor in July 18, it's because I'm consistent with how I trade my story. I cannot come and factor in Islam here because the story didn't begin with Islam. I cannot come and factor in the issue between the king of the north and the south, spheres of influence. If you want to deal with Islam, dread a different story. When it comes to the repeating pattern, we need to understand how they work. So this is 2019. This is 2021. And here, this 2021, this is the formalization gives us the aspect of a loud cry. You could also put the aspect of time. There are many events you can parallel. So as we factor in peace, we also need to bring this to our attention. That at this moment we call Boston, when the message arrives, you see nothing. When the message increases in knowledge, it begins to become visible. You can begin to see something. And you begin to see two classes formed. Then coming to Exeter, this is what you'd call the policy statement. Here now, everything is visible. There is more visibility. And when I speak of visibility, this is the present. You can see the future, and you can also look backwards and see the past. That was the work of Samuel Snow's message here at Exeter. Here, Samuel Snow. When Samuel Snow comes with the midnight cry message, Samuel Snow begins with a questionnaire. That is on the 14th of August. And he asks a question: where are we in history? The first thing they need to understand is where they are. What is the answer? For those who know the writings, where are they? Yes, current time, the present. They need to realize Snow has to make them understand the present. They are in the current time. And then Snow will go ahead to explain to them the past. Why? Why they were what? Why they were disappointed. And he proves to them why he was not disappointed. Because on April 19, when they are getting disappointed, Snow has the light. He's already studying. Snow is not disappointed. He's taking them back to show them where their tarrying time began, showing them why they should not have expected Christ in April. And then he goes to the future, and what does he do? He tells them why they should expect Christ when? On October. And on each case, he gives arguments. Look at the feasts, the spring feast, the autumn feast, all that. So this is the characteristic of Exeter. It's here where everything begins to look like a panorama. Everything is beginning to happen in clarity. And the two sides are settled. You can begin to see actions, all that. So when you come to this event here, again, this is one of the dilemmas we have had for long. It's July 18 or whatever date you want to see. But what is the problem? You can't see anything. And it brings a lot of doubt to this waymark. It's here when things begin to look visible and you begin to see two different classes on how they receive that message. Different opinions. Some are beginning to settle here, others settle on the other side. By the time you come to Exeter, there is the two sides settled, and this is when things look now clear. You can take this concept, it's a repeating pattern, and go to every dispensation, and you're actually going to see it. Because I know my time is almost up, I'm just going to give a few more concepts and then we close. And then in the evening, we'll have Q&A. A recent study done about the message. The message comes in what? In their order and what? And time. And when you look at this dispensation, the Sunday law, let me not put that line first. When you look at this dispensation, this history here, you need to understand this is the history of the latter rain. I wish I had time to discuss more about the latter rain, but if I have future class of the issues we listed, we can speak more about it. The question that is being asked, why is all this information important? Trying to factor in this waymark here and this dispensation here. And the question that is being asked, is it what? Is it salvational to understand this and actually the dispensation? Because if there is that agitation on which is the waymark, what is the marker, which is the event that marks this, why are we bothering to understand? Is it actually salvational to understand this waymark, to have it the correct way and dispensation. And you're going to see, if you factor in what dispensation this is, it's the history of the latter rain, and realizing that there are many way marks. There are many teachers with different markers for this. One thing you need to understand is that despite them dealing with the aspect of election and voting, is that they are speaking different things because they're using different models. That's why they are arriving at different conclusions. We cannot all speak of the same thing and we have different conclusions. People can approach in different perspectives, but they end up at the same point. You would say they are speaking the same thing, but they are now having different answers, meaning those are different models. So we cannot all say all of them are correct. And when you factor into that and ask yourself whether it's salvational to understand the correct and why it's actually important to have it right here, then we will understand that you cannot just pick any concept. The first thing I want us to see is that where you stand or where you start determines what? Where you end. If you start here, you end here. If you start here, you end here. So, number two, when you read, I hope we'll have time, but this is a quote, ST 216.1. I'm not going to read because of time. But what this quote brings into our mind is that it gives us two dispensations, a period of preparation. This is the Wemark Sunday law. This is the Wemark close of probation. And this is the history of the mark of the beast. That's what Ellen White says. And she's asking, what are you doing? So it's an address to the Adventists, people. You can take it and apply it to yourself. Because there are people who are getting ready to receive the mark of the beast. And there are those who are getting ready to receive the mark of God. So people are taking the shape of the mold. So when you come here, people have already received it here. She speaks about just imprinting. So it's like it's already signed and written. You only need to stamp it. Are you together? That's the kind of perspective she brings out. And so what you need to understand is that when you come into this period of preparation, which is this dispensation here, you need to understand that this period here is a period of test. The test that people want to see as the test of the Sunday law, because we have the mentality that this is the great test. You need to see from this quote that it's here where people choose sides. This dispensation here, those who receive the mark of God and those who receive the mark of the beast, even before this dispensation. And that's why I asked a question, what is the test here? And when you try to understand what is the message that is unsealed here, you'd say it's the message of what? Which message increases in knowledge? 2019. By then it's feminism. By the time you come to 2021, it becomes now what? Radical feminism. So from 2021 to the Sunday law, this is when we speak of the test. And what was the test? When does the test of radical feminism come to an end? At the Sunday law. At the Sunday law, another message arrives in history. This message will increase in knowledge, and this message will test. I want to suggest this message is not radical feminism. If you understand how the repeating patterns work, it's a different message. And that's why it's actually important to understand this event, because this is what marks the arrival of a message. It's what marks what increases and what will test us. So if you get it wrong here, you know that you get it wrong everywhere. So it's important to understand the repeating patterns, because if we get it right here, we'll actually be led to understand what is our test in this dispensation of the latter rain. Because some of us still carry the same concepts of radical feminism into this dispensation. We need to understand the repeating patterns. When you come here, the test that was here was for this dispensation, this. What we know is that because you have been tested here, now you are done, you forget all this and carry on. You carry along this baggage of truth with you. Are we together? So as you keep carrying along with the message of equality, which I believe in one way or another, the message that arrives or unseals here with it has bits of equality, radical feminism, just like you see all along, all the tests that have been here. Even as we stand here, the same concepts here again manifest where we stand. So we need to understand the test here is a different test. We are done with this period and the test is over. We need to focus what waymark is this, because I'm going to suggest it's salvational to understand that waymark. I don't have time. And it's also salvational to understand this dispensation and getting it right here. So I believe it's over. 1 minute. So I believe that when you still continue with the same concept, maybe I'll draw it here. 2001, Sunday law, COP, second advent. So we have said this is the unsealing of the message. The message increases in knowledge, formalized, like that. Unseal, increase in knowledge, formalized, like that. Unseal, increase in knowledge, formalized, like that. That's how our repeating patterns should be working. And I'm saying, when you come to this, this is the message of equality. This is feminism. This is radical feminism. And we are going to see that this dispensation, we are tested on gender equality. And the end of the test is that dispensation. So we need to see a message unseen. And when you look at all the teachers and most of the message that is being shared today, it's an interesting understanding about the seventh kingdom. So there are truths about this kingdom that we actually need to see that will bring us to a test. So we need to focus more on the understanding of this kingdom here. And just to mention some of these concepts as facts. I don't have time to finish everything. This is external. We need to understand these external histories that deal with the seven. This one, you can all attest it was internal. It was all challenging us internally. We need to see how the seventh kingdom interacts with equality. So all the studies that we are having now, they are all focusing on how this kingdom comes into power. It's through an election, how these kingdoms behave, how this kingdom rules in this short period here internally. And we all understand this kingdom still rules in this dispensation. And it's not just the seventh, but it is the seventh incorporated in what I would call the kings of the earth. In this dispensation, another message will be unsealed from COP, increase in knowledge and test God's people. So we need to see how the repeating patterns work. And what we need to understand, as much as we are more oriented on this, we need to focus more on this. I know people still don't believe the significance of external events, some of us, because we are more oriented to gender equality. But in this dispensation, for you to be safe, you need to understand perfectly the external events and how the seventh kingdom rises and falls. I don't know how the test looks like, but it comes from that history. We are more of observers here. We were more of actors here. You need to observe and look how things unveil. Because I believe after having to see how this kingdom interacts with this equality, I believe it will be our turn to act and understand how we can develop a better kingdom, not a compromised one, that is founded on the very principle of this message that God gave us here. So keep understanding these events. They are so rapid and many. I don't know how we sift them. I will stop there. I didn't finish, but I was 90%. Today I was better. So just a 1 minute recap. I'm doing all this to bring our attention to this dispensation. I may not know everything, but I just want to share my thoughts. Some of the ways in which we need to approach this dispensation. Some of the concepts we need to apply to get it right here. There is a lot of mixture of information, and to sift it is not so easy. But if we understand how the rules work, if we understand such concepts that we have had for so long, we have not been here for the first time. We have been here before. So it's all about factoring that the worst thing is for us to forget the way the Lord has led us. Go back to those concepts that we were once challenged with and how we argued out those issues and came to a good and correct answer. Once we do that, we will come here and have it right. Because at the end of it all, we need to come into a what? A concord. We need to come into an agreement. So it's too much information, but we need to see, based on the two presentations that I've given, that when you start combining the work of these teachers, Curtis has given a study, the sin of the glorious land. Elder Tess has given a study, the sin of the glorious land. Elder Pamina has given a study, Leviathan, and why the glorious land is punished. You just need to combine those concepts. They may be approaching the issue in different angles. At the end of it all, you'll have it right. And then you put to scrutiny using the correct techniques that they are that you understand and how they are using it. And then you can be able to tell, is this right? Is this wrong? Maybe you have a contrary opinion on what they say, but at the end of it all, it is a step to bringing us to a concord, because we need to come into a concord to see. No, we all are going to have one test, not everyone a different test. So we need to understand which is the message that leads us to a test. At the end of it all, we must have that. So I'll stop there because of time, and we'll pray. Thank you, Lord, for the wonderful moment as we continue juggling these concepts. They're not so easier with our layman's knowledge and understanding. But we believe that if we believe that you can understand and come into a concord, it will happen. Empty all our negative biases into our minds and help us to have the eyesight to see things clearly as you want them. we live in perilous times when things are so rapid as we come to the close of this earth's history. As members of this movement, help us to equip ourselves with the right message, to understand that being here physically is not a guarantee that you're in the movement, but being equipped with the right message and walking on the right path is the assurance that we have that we are part of your kingdom, because the message itself will be able to transform us and mold us into a perfect character. Help us to understand all these truths that are impacting us today in the correct light, that when storms come, none of us will be shaken. Be with us even to the rest programs that follow today. And I pray this believing and trusting in Jesus' name. Amen.